Hello, my name is Hezra Guo.
Hello, my name is Xiaofei Liu.
Hello, my name is Alicia Tsai.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Ten.
Hello, my name is Yuanshen Tsai.
And my name is Kyle Chu, and this is our 2025 WEC Thinking and Innovation presentation from GEMS Academy of Taiwan, Team 1.
Let's start with the first question. First, during peak times, the demand for rides increase, shifting the demand curve to the right. These lead to a higher equilibrium price and an increasing quantity demand. The higher price attract more drivers, shifting the supply curve to the right. This additional supply causes the price to fall slightly and the quantity increase again. But this process doesn't stop after one adjustment. In reality, both demand and supply shift rapidly in response to each other. As shown in the price versus time graph, price is not constant. It fluctuates continuously as the system adjusts. A price increase attracts more drivers to enter the market, leading to an increase in supply. As supply rises, price began to fall. In response to lower prices, some driver may exit the market, which then causes the price to rise again. This cycle continues, creating a repeating pattern of market adjustment.
Our main graph shows that demand shifts right from D1 to D2, and supply response from shift from S1 to S2, and equilibrium moves from E1 to E2 to E3. The price and quantity settle temporarily, but with new events or rider surges, the cycle repeats. Dynamic pricing allows the market to stay responsive and efficient. Finally, using the midpoint formula, we calculate the price elasticity of supply to be around 1.67, showing that the supply is elastic, meaning drivers are highly responsive to changing prices.
Moving on to short answer 2. Trust mechanisms help reduce information asymmetry, where one side knows better than the others. That's why the sharing economy relies on rating and reviews to reduce uncertainty. High rating signals reliability and trustworthiness would help users make informed decisions. For example, a 4.9 star Airbnb rating helps guests trust the host without needing to ask. This kind of peer-generated information can help users avoid risk by learning from other past experience. This can also connect to the traditional labor market, where references act like reviews and help employers judge a worker's reliability before hiring, reducing the risk of moral hazard.
However, there are drawbacks. According to behavioral economics, users sometimes give feedback based on emotional rather than facts. This leads to reputation inflation, where most ratings are unrealistic high because of social pressure. From a game theory perspective, especially in two-sided platform, users might inflate rating to avoid receiving bad reviews for themselves. This makes rating less reliable and can weakness the network effects, as declining trust cause fewer users to engage with this platform. One benefit of this is increase the trust by lowering risk related to accident or damage, encouraging more users to join. However, on the downside, insurance can raise costs and it might be tricky to regulate.
Moving on to question 3. In the platform market, Burnside has middlemen, connecting service providers and consumers, benefiting from network effects, as more workers attract more users, and vice versa. To minimize costs and maintain flexibility, platforms classify workers as independent contractors, avoiding fixed wages and enabling rapid scaling of labor supply. One negative externality is that independent contractors do not receive employee benefits like health insurance or unemployment protection. As a result, they may rely more heavily on publicly funded welfare programs, externalizing the cost and burden of basic needs to taxpayers. A second externality is unfair competition from regulatory arbitrage. Firms using independent contractors bypass labor regulations and benefit costs, allowing them to offer lower prices. This pressures traditional businesses to cut wages or protections, eroding overall labor standards and harming worker welfare. Our solution is a portable benefits system that requires platforms to contribute a share of each transaction to a workers' benefits fund. This reduces reliance on public welfare, promotes fairness between gig platforms and traditional firms, and supports worker well-being. While it may raise platform costs and private society, it helps internalize the external social cost of good work, as shown in the graph.
Now that we've finished all the short answer questions, let's move on to the main problem. The rise of Airbnb has created a housing crisis by reducing long-term rental supply, driving up prices and displacing residents. This reflects a market failure with significant negative externalities. Economically, it's a tragedy of the commons, where housing is overused without regulation and a moral hazard as platforms face no penalty for the harm costs, leading to unchecked exploitation of housing markets.
For solution 1, our proposed solution is a progressive STR impact fee paired with a housing trust fund. It applies Pigovian taxation theory to internalize the negative externality STRs imposed on local housing markets. Short-term rentals reduce long-term housing availability and contribute to the displacement. However, banning STRs outright creates its own economic efficiencies. Instead, our fee structure charges operators based on the degree of housing disruption. The diagram on the right illustrates a classic negative externality. Without regulation, STRs are produced at Q private, where the demand curve also equals to the marginal benefit, means the private supply curve also equals to the marginal private cost. But this ignores the social costs like rent, inflation, and displacement, which shifts the true cost curve up to the marginal social cost. The gap between the marginal social cost and marginal private cost at the optimal output, Q social, represents the Pigovian tax. If we don't tax, we get a purple deadweight loss area, which reflects overuse of STRs beyond the socially efficient level. The fee system is progressive. Highest for single-family homes, which remove 4 housing units from the market, and lower for purpose-built commercial STRs, and rising with annual rental nights, so it discourages full-time commercial use. 100% of these fund a house trust fund that supports down payment aid, rental assistance for displaced residents, and affordable housing development. This method is proven effective by economic research. Economic research shows that housing trust fund leverage 5-to-1, with each dollar returning $5 of housing investment. According to data from the Miami-Dade Homeless Trust, each dollar invested through a fund leverages $5 of total housing investment. This policy embodies the polluter pays principle from environmental economics. STRs operators can continue doing business, but must compensate for their social impact.
Economically, this approach offers 3 major advantages. It avoids deadweight loss caused by quantity caps or outright bans. It creates a sustainable revenue stream for housing, and it leverages market forces to get STR behavior. On the bottom left, we compare 2 policy options. On the left graph, quantity restriction artificially cap STR activity at Q using price selling. This creates a deadweight loss triangle, which is an inefficient outcome. On the right, the Pigovian tax raises the cost per STR night, shown by the upward shift to S plus tax. This reduces quantity to Q tax but captures the excess value as tax revenue, shown in purple. That revenue funds housing solution instead of being lost as economic waste. Of course, this approach is not without risk. That's why we've outlined potential unintended consequences, including fee pass-through to gas, tax avoidance, or unfair burden of small hosts. Gas facing higher price, though, is intended as it discourages overuse and help reserve rights for long-term residents for housing. To address these, we recommend platform-based enforcement and exemption for part-time operators. Finally, to remain effective and fair, this policy must be adjusted annually based on housing condition and STR activity.
Now moving on to the second solution. Our second solution is to push short-term rental regulation through spatial and urban economic theory. Spatial economics explain how different locations have different opportunity costs and best use. For example, downtown area may have higher value for tourism, while quieter neighborhoods are better for long-term housing. Urban economic, on the other hand, focus on using land in the most efficient way to reduce negative externality, such as rising rent or housing shortage caused by short-term rental. Another important principle here is recognizing that not all areas have the same capacity for tourism or housing. The core of this proposal is the 3-zone system: tourism commercial zone, which are the central or high tourism area. In these areas, unlimited short-term rental are allowed as long as they're properly licensed. Secondly, mixed-use residential zone, which are known as the transitional area between tourist center and quiet suburbs. Lastly, protected residential zone are the most sensitive area, such as family neighborhoods. Here, only owner-occupied home sharing is allowed, and is capped at 60 nights per year to protect housing supply. The diagram on the right illustrates this clearly.
Now, let's talk about how the system is enforced and its economic rationale. All short-term rental operators must have license and pay annual fees. Platforms like Airbnb must share real-time data to help cities enforce rules. In mixed-use zone, permit allocation is done through competitive bidding. The economic theory behind this is creating artificial scarcity. By limiting the number of permits, the city can control supply and capture economic rent. In addition, this policy also has several economic advantages. It can protect housing through residential zones and use it for more efficiency, which is known for urban economic. It also maintains tourism revenue where it's sustainable. However, there are potential downsides to consider. Some hosts might turn to the black market to avoid restriction. There may be spillover effects in the nearby towns not under the same rules, and there's the possibility of legal pushback from property owners who feel that their rights are being limited.
Our third solution centers on supply expansion, applying supply-side economics to counteract the rising pressure short-term rentals or STRs are placing on local housing markets. Let's start with the problem. When platforms like Airbnb bring tourists into the housing market, they increase total demand for housing, but the supply of housing doesn't automatically rise with that demand, especially in the short run when housing is inelastic and slow to adapt. Because tourists are often willing to pay more than locals, landlords start favoring them. That results in locals getting priced out and a steep increase in rental prices overall. The rental market becomes distorted. So, how do we fix this without harming the benefits that tourism brings? We can focus on expanding housing supply, but targeted ways that don't rely on buying new land. First, we can subsidize homeowners who convert underutilized properties into rentals. Alternatively, we can support homeowners offering shared rentals like renting out rooms. This increases the supply with minimal disruption. Second, we can repurpose underutilized public land for rental use. By turning these spaces into public-private partnerships, we can unlock capacity without competing with existing land use. Third, we explore non-traditional housing formats like camper vans or modular units. These are flexible, quick to deploy, and can serve both tourists and locals, providing a much-needed buffer when housing stock is tight. Finally, government-funded development projects can expand long-term rental capacity in a sustainable way, especially in cities experiencing rapid tourism-driven demand shocks. Together, these measures shift the supply curve to the right, making the market more responsive and helping stabilize prices. Now let's look at the graph to visualize what's happening here. Initially, we have the demand curve D in representing local renters. When tourists enter the market, demand shifts to D1. Without any change in supply, we move from equilibrium P1 Q1 to P2 Q2, higher prices and lower availability for locals. But with our supply expansion strategy, the supply curve shifts right from S to S2. We move back to the original equilibrium P3 Q3, where prices drop and availability rises. That's the power of supply side intervention. Of course, there's a clear trade-off between tourism and housing affordability. Tourism brings big economic benefits, increased tax revenue, stronger local businesses, and more service sector jobs. But residents bear real costs, from rising rent and the displacement of essential workers to the breakdown of long-standing community structures. And while regulating STRs with too heavily might sound like a simple fix, it comes with unintended consequences. Tourism competitiveness could suffer if accommodation becomes scarce. And as visitor volume grows, cities may see infrastructure strain. Things like public transport, waste management, and emergency services all get overloaded. That's why instead of restricting demand, we advocate for making supply more adaptive. It's a more sustainable, flexible approach. To conclude, our presentation explored how the sharing economy is transforming traditional markets, from ride sharing to short-term rentals, and how this disrupts labor protections, housing affordability, and regulatory frameworks. We emphasize the trade-off between innovation and inequality, showing how platforms like Uber and Airbnb can increase efficiency but also lead to market failures if left unchecked. Through our proposed solutions, we apply core economic theories, including externalities, urban zoning, and supply-side economics, to design targeted second-best policies. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure that as the economy evolves, we preserve both efficiency and fairness, making sure the benefits of the sharing economy are broadly and equitably shared. Thank you.